Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jerry, the real Jerry, not the one that usually has Tom sitting behind it. I guess we're going to probably wait for probably 2 more minutes, just let more people arrive, and then we'll get started.
1 second.
All right, we'll go ahead and get going here. My name is Jerry Prochaska, and I would like to introduce our panel here today on our Commission for DEI Matters in Higher Education. I'm very proud of all the work that we've done on this. We've spent about 18 months, and I'm sure everyone will explain this during the presentation today, on developing a certification that can actually be used in higher ed. And on our panel today, we have Marlo Robinson from Concord, Eric Langness with Rasmussen, Laura Plummer from Western Technical, and Reggie Moore from Quad Partners. So with that, I'm just going to go dark here for a little bit and let our commissioners share all of this information on the certification with you.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Good afternoon, everyone. We are so very pleased to have you join us today. My name is Dr. Marlo Robinson, and I am one of the 4 CSPEN DEI commissioners speaking during today's panel. Joining me are Commissioners Eric Langness, Reggie Moore, and Laura Plummer. The founder of this commission, as you know, is Jerry. The commissioners who are not here today, but who have contributed significantly, are Todd Jacob, Julie Maselli, Jane Parker, and Justin Harper. So now I want to take you back to the start of this pandemic. And if you'll recall with me, the start of the viral pandemic introduced a number of medical terms that were new to many in the public. Some of those terms included messenger RNA, monoclonal antibody therapy, and PPE, just to name a few. And for those of you who may not recall, that is our personal protective equipment. Then, with the viral pandemic serving as a backdrop, the murder of George Floyd played out on every major communication outlet for the world to view on May 25th of 2020. And known terms, especially in DEI circles, reemerged. Some of those terms include diversity, equity, and inclusion, Black Lives Matter, and Blue Lives Matter. By the way, my life matters, and your life matters too. And DEI allies. And now I have reimagined a term for your consideration, and that term is PPT. No, it doesn't stand for PowerPoint. It stands for the pivot plot twist. You may be wondering, what do I mean here? So here are 2 examples. At the start of Q1 2020, most of us were going about our ADLs, which are our activities of daily living, without much thought of how our world would change if we encountered a deadly viral agent. Then, with no forewarning, the second week of March began the ushering in of a next normal for all of us, a new way of life. This next normal impacted our industry and resulted in online classes at institutions that may have only discussed stages at that point. Disruptive innovation will accelerate discussion into action, won't it? In other words, our pivot to online learning was the response to the COVID plot twist. Second example, a few short months later, we witnessed a Black man's death as he lay face down, crying out for his mother. For a full 9 minutes and 29 seconds, students, employees, leaders, community members, people watched in horror and realization that this pandemic almost passed us by without notice. But because the viral pandemic had us glued to our personal devices, we saw the coverage, and for many, it was the first time the truths of this pandemic became a reality. Though there have been hundreds of such incidents that many knew about all too well, when we saw it collectively as a world, it provided the opportunity for us to lean in and pivot due to the pandemic of incivility and injustice, which of course was the plot twist. Because the lines between role and real are not black and white, personal life events inform professional work behavior for your employees and your students. And so on June 9, 2020, Jerry issued an invitation via email to any interested party, which read in part, "We must do something to initiate the conversation on socioeconomic and social issues and how these issues affect your students and institution's future." For those of us who answered the call, Jerry shared that she wasn't sure what we needed to do, but she knew one thing for sure: we needed to do something. We all agreed with her, and so our honest discussions and work began. Those of us who answered her call to action are now titled CSPEN's DEI commissioners, and as such, we are issuing a call to action to each of you. There seems to be a prevailing belief among us commissioners that one may or may not agree with another's policies, policing, or politics, and that's okay. We can and should show intentional respect for another human being with whom we share time, space, and opportunity. It is in that spirit that we ask you to join us as an ally in this work. DEI matters in higher education, and we encourage you to do your own pivot by learning more about how your institution can earn certification in DEI matters, and then actually take the steps to become certified. We will equip you with a pathway and tools to assist you in defining and customizing what showing up and leaning in into DEI matters in higher education looks like at your institution. And so now I'd like to ask each one of our panelists to share their why. Why this work? Why now? And how will you proceed forward in this important journey? So I'm going to start from left to right on my screen, and that will be with you, Eric. If you would please share your why this work, why now, and what's next?
Thank you, Marlo. So originally, my interest in joining Jerry's effort in this was, I grew up as an inner city kid in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. And so the impacts for me personally were quite great. I saw businesses be destroyed blocks from where I grew up. I saw friendships in that I have both in a family and personal life outside of relatives that have some minority people that were just in terror and fear, and the emotional outcomes that that's what drove me initially to join the group. But as we went through the last 18 months, the ongoing efforts, I think the greater piece is improving society via education. And that both fits the mission of the college that I work for, as well as my own personal mission.
Thank you so much for sharing. And it is enough when you witness so much to drive you into action for sure. Thank you, Eric. Laura?
Jerry sent an email out to all CSPEN email recipients, and I was on that email thread, not realizing that the Jerry I thought was on that email was not the same Jerry that actually was sending out the cry for help. But it was a cry for help. And it didn't matter who won on the other end. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I responded because of the cry for help from Jerry. I live in El Paso, Texas. It's a Southwestern culture, highly populated by Hispanics, and a comfortable place to live, no matter who you are or what your skin color or your religious beliefs or anything else. But the rest of my country was suffering. And I come from New England, and I understood the pain. So I volunteered to be part of the panel so that we could come together from our different diverse backgrounds, having grown up in New England, but also now living in El Paso, Texas, to share with other people how we could make a difference for the entire country. That's a big ask, but we believed in our hearts, and I think we still believe after 18 months getting to know each other that we can make a difference, one school at a time, one person in that school at a time. So it is my hope that by being on this panel and sharing with all of you, that you will be able to reach down and know what it is you want to do about some of the situations that we are facing, and about some of the certifications that we are offering. So I am here at your disposal. We are all here at your disposal to try to help you bring your school to the same place we would like our schools to be.
Wonderful. Laura, thank you so much for sharing your why. Next, we'll have Reggie share his why.
Okay, I hope everybody can hear me. I'm sort of at a disadvantage. I'm gonna get my computer to work on audio. You know, I got to tell you, this is near and dear to my heart because I remember watching, as Marlo talked about, the George Floyd murders, and I remember I was actually in New Orleans when the pandemic broke out, and I attended Mardi Gras. And I felt sick, but I didn't know why. So I really think I probably had COVID-19 at this earlier stage. But I remember Jerry calling me after watching the George Floyd murder, and thinking how angry I was. And Jerry called me, and I told this story many times, so I'll tell it again. It's the truth. I said, Jerry, why are you calling me? Am I your only black friend? She said, no. And I said, well, I'm angry right now. I don't want to talk. And I ended up calling her back and saying, Jerry, I apologize. And we then talked about something has to be done. Something has to be done to make our schools a safe place for our students, for our employees, and for all of us. And, I elected to join this panel, this great group of people that I've become friends with over time. And I'm so glad I called her back because our main topic was all lives matter, not just Black Lives Matter, that all lives matter. And then we wanted to do this to make our schools a safe place for our students. And Jerry mentioned I was with Quiet Partners. Well, I'm actually the president of Blue Cliff Colleges. And I'm telling you now, we're going to make this a part of what we do at Blue Cliff College. So that's all I have, Marla. I hope everybody could hear.
We could. Thank you so much, Reggie. All right. Well, thank you all for sharing. I sure appreciate everyone sharing their why. We want to move on through because there's some important information to share with you all, kind of next steps about the certification process. And just so that I can provide some context to that, as we came together and as we brainstormed and thought, all right, what are we going to do that's meaningful, really meaningful for our students, meaningful especially for institutions who may not have any framework whatsoever to start this work. Where do we start? What do we do? And so with those questions in mind, that this certification process was born. So what Laura and I will go through next is a two-tiered opportunity for institutions to engage in a very directed way, engage into becoming certified in DEI matters in higher education. And for those institutions who perhaps are overachievers, who maybe already had some processes in place, or maybe they're like, yes, we can do that, what's required, at a minimal level for certification, but we can do that, and we can do that on steroids. And so we'll do the certification plus. Well, there's an opportunity for you as well. So if you are able to see your screen, you will see that there's a social justice certification, and it's bulleted to go through first the areas, the domains that we wanted to target, and then there are suggested activities in each of these targeted domains. So Laura, I'm just going to ask if you could walk us through this process, the certification process. We can then talk a bit about Certification Plus.
Sure. So as we developed the list for certification, our goal was that any school who wanted to participate in CSPEN certification for DEI had a way to do that regardless of size of school. I know there are some schools that are on the call that are probably quite large and able to implement quickly. There are others of us that are a smaller school that are still family owned, but we also want to make a difference. So when we were coming up with the individual bullet points on this list on your screen, we were trying to keep it as less sophisticated as possible so that anybody could grab on to the bullet points and start walking through them. So on this first screen, you'll see several, maybe a dozen bullet points. And on the next screen, you'll see that the list continues. It is a very, very long list, but it is all touching on the same exact topic. How do we buy in to the CSPEN certification for DEI? How do we say that we are going to stand up and say that diversity, equity, and inclusion matter in our school? So as you go through the bullet points, to get started, just pick the ones that are the ones you can do right away, and then work on the rest of the bullet points as you grow in this concept. And once you have made it through all of the bullet points on the list, our panel will review your submission, and then we will determine whether or not you have met the criteria for the certification. Once you have achieved that, if you'd like to be an overachiever, as Marlo mentioned, then we do have a second phase. But we intentionally designed this first phase to be something that any size school could start to tackle, one bullet point at a time.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you know what, Laura, if you could just show, and I think it's embedded in the PowerPoint, but the different areas, the actual sheet, and if you don't have it in the PowerPoint, please don't look for it. But if you've got it in the PowerPoint and we can show kind of the different domains, there really were specific areas that we wanted to target. One really important aspect of all of this work was to create a safe space for students and for faculty. Another was to embed DEI matters into the curriculum. So you see this long list of bulleted areas. These are suggestions. They're not necessarily, 100% you have to have all of these as requirements. Many of them are meant to spark ideas for you to be creative in making this your own, initiative in the sense that it meets your mission, your school's vision, and your school's values. So we had some schools that are at the very beginning of this process. They hadn't created any policy or really given a lot of intentional thought as to what this could look like in their institution. Well, then these bullets are perfect for you because they are very specific in helping you understand what you can do, choosing those things that resonate with your institution and being able to then put them in the buckets that meet the certification requirements. And I say that because, again, if you've done nothing, and I'm kind of coming from a perspective, perhaps you're new in this journey. If you've done nothing, then this will guide you so that you can create a committee or several subcommittees, and everyone can have some ownership in creating this atmosphere. But it was really meant to create curriculum, activities, ideas in your curriculum, and then safe spaces for your faculty, safe spaces for your students, whether that is virtually or physically or a blend of both, and then allow for some community outreach, because most of us have circles of spheres of influence, and we can reach out to our neighbors in the community and get them involved as well in what our institutions are doing. So I want to just stop here at this point. I've got a few questions that I want to ask the panel. And before I jump into those very specific, questions for the panel, I just want to allow Eric and Reggie, allow you as well the opportunity to share anything that you've done so far at your institutions. So Eric, I'll start with you first.
Sure.
And if you could share where you're at in your journey in all of this.
So our institution is approximately 30 campuses scattered across the country and has a significantly large volume of student population. And we have an existing DEI structure that very much fits many, if not nearly all of the components that the process we went through and outlined have. So I think at this point, my next step really is to go through and find what we may be not doing or not doing as well as we could, expand on that.
Awesome. Thank you. Reggie?
So our campuses are significantly smaller than the 35 that Eric represents. With our campuses are 6 in Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi. And we started by rolling this out to our corporate staff. And we have, I always believe you got to have somebody in charge. So we've got somebody in charge of rolling this out to our campuses. And then we're going to pick a leader at each campus. And we're going to try to do as many of these items on the certification as possible. And just like you said, anyone who's rolling this out, start. If you want to start with a few of them, and I guess you say crescendo into them all, or start with trying to do them all. I found for us, it's better that we start with a few and crescendo. So that's where we are with our college.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Marla.
Thank you. And Laura, any
So-
steps that you all may have taken so far?
We have 2 campuses. So we are on the little end of the spectrum for the CSPEN panel conversation. So I would bring that perspective as far as financially, what are we financially able to do? Enactment, of course, is probably going to be less confusing and chaotic because we don't have as many moving parts. However, we have to start with buy-in. Our very first step was we have now swapped out one of the holidays listed on our calendar was Good Friday, and we have swapped that out for Juneteenth because we felt that Juneteenth was much more all-inclusive of an entire population that attends this school as well as works at this school. So that has been approved and enacted at our school. And truly, it can be that simple. Take a look at what it is that you are focusing on and maybe just a little shift in your focus from how things have always been. Well, we don't do that to, well, what can we do to make a change to demonstrate to our students and to our staff that we do care about the entire population of our workforce and our students. So step 1 for us was one of the simple things. Recognize Juneteenth, understand what it is, and implement it as one of the recognized holidays. So we have 1 bullet point down and a whole bunch more to work towards, but we have started the conversation, and I think that is the most important part of this entire thing. Start a conversation.
And I concur. Thank you for sharing. And I'll just share with you all what we're doing at Concord Career Colleges. So we're nationwide, and we're just right in the middle between everyone, right? We are about 16 nationwide. And so within our campuses, we have actually at our corporate support center, we have actually kind of taken the lead on that. And we are working with each of the campuses in a very intentional manner. And so it started with a phone call to our CEO, Jamie Frazier, right after the murder of George Floyd occurred. And there were 3 of us that were pretty distraught. I'm sure there were more, but we were just very vocal and said, something's got to happen. It's got to happen right now. And she absolutely agreed. And if you'll recall just kind of what that season felt like, but there were protests and there were, and many of them were, very peaceful and very quiet, but just very powerful and all across the world, right? It wasn't just isolated here in the United States. I mean, it was worldwide that we saw these very peaceful protests with people just sharing how they felt. And so they were happening locally with our students. They were happening locally near our campuses. And so we knew that our students were going through what we were going through. We knew our students were feeling what they were feeling. And so that 3 co-chairs kind of grew then into a steering committee of interested people who wanted to be involved, who knew that we needed to answer a call and do something. And so now we have a steering committee of 9 members, and we meet weekly. And from that steering committee came 3 subcommittees. And those subcommittees really were very focused on specific issues. So we've got one subcommittee for events, we've got another one that does like continuing education, and we have another one that's HR, retention, and recruitment. Those were the 3 areas we thought were important to focus on to get started. And so those subcommittees meet every week, and they are coming up with those items in their bucket. They're applicable. They bring it up to the steering committee. We have discussions about it. So that was kind of phase 1. The next thing that we did was we held listening sessions for our associates, that's what we call employees, and listening sessions for our students. And they were just that. We had a facilitator, a nationally known facilitator come in, Donna Hay Jones. She is an expert in this area, and she facilitated and guided conversations, but we didn't ask many questions. We sat back and we did what you're supposed to do in a listening session, and that is be quiet, right? That's the whole, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you can listen twice as much as you speak theory, and that's exactly what we did. We took notes, and then we began to address what we were hearing in the listening sessions, both in the associate sessions and in the student sessions. So what we heard, kind of common themes in the associate sessions were, I don't know what to do with this, but I'm so glad that we're doing something at Concord. I don't know what this means for us, but we know that it's time to do something in this season. So that was kind of a common theme. And then there were some suggestions of what that could look like. You know, how can we affect our curriculum? Well, we know it now because we've got a certification process through CSPEN, how we can affect curriculum. In our student sessions, also really so informative, so thoughtful. And they focused on examples of areas where they were able to treat cultures that were diverse and how important it was to understand before they ever went into the clinical arena what those cultures might need from them as a healthcare provider. So many programs that we offer. So that was really important to be able to bring those conversations back into the classroom. We had several students talk about how faculty mirrored a love for their culture and the desire to share their culture with the students, and how much that meant to students to have a better understanding and be exposed to cultures that they may not have otherwise been exposed to. So we took that information back. The events subcommittee decided, you know what, the end of the year, the last week of the year, let's do something that celebrates culture. So we did that virtually. We each day had a different kind of culturally centered event where people could post on the social media pages of our Facebook, and everyone, you know, really just participated and had a good time. So there's just some ideas. I want to give you tangible ideas because, again, I think a lot of this is just where do we start? Similarly, to Laura, we changed one of our holidays to a floating holiday, and that could be culturally based. So there are so many cultures, and we wanted to be really clear, and I should stop here and just say that when we talk about being inclusive, though it does include culture, it's not just culture, right? So I'm spending a lot of time focusing on culture, but please know that we recognize and honor that inclusivity is a very broad range of intentionally being inclusive all across the isms, ageism and racism and sexual orientation, and every ism that we can consider, that's inclusive, right? So that floating holiday was meant to allow the associate to choose what was important to them and to celebrate that in the way that they wanted to celebrate it. Because there were questions like, oh, will we celebrate Cinco de Mayo as a holiday? And the answer with that floating holiday was sure, if you want to, right? You absolutely can, as well as celebrating Juneteenth and other significant holidays. So I just am honored to have the opportunity to share this with you all, to learn from the panelists, to learn from what some of you have shared. When we were live in Chicago presenting this session, there were several people that came up afterwards. One was so, for me, just really meant a lot, very touching. We had an attendee say, you know, my husband's a police officer, and I don't share that freely because those weren't stories, at least the better stories of the really fantastic police officers. Those weren't what we were seeing after the murder of George Floyd. And so I'm really very selective about who I share that with. But I'm so thankful to be able to say to you and others that he's a good policeman. You know, he's a person who would take part in all of these activities. He's a community partner. He's an ally. See, we need to hear those stories because our students, well, their dads and their spouses and their mother, they're policemen, and they participate in all other activities across the walks of life, just like we do. And so to be able to create a safe space for everyone to tell their story, to share their truth, that really gets to the heart of what this certification process is offering. So I've said a lot of words here, and I want to stop and just give the other panelists an opportunity to weigh in if there's something they'd like to weigh in on, and then I'll go on to the Q&A session.
Well, this is Reggie Moore. Marlo, you brought up a very good topic. One of the things we're doing, we're looking at holidays, and something that I want to share that I had almost taken for granted. One of the holidays we had was Good Friday. And I was reminded that our campuses are so culturally diverse. For example, we even have one in New York. So not everyone in New York is of a Christian faith. So Good Friday was almost offensive. So we've changed that to a floating holiday. So in New York, it's important that they have Christopher Columbus Day, for example. It's important that some people celebrate presidents. You just can't take anything for granted. The other thing is that I was surprised how important this initiative is to our students. I didn't even know that some students didn't feel safe until we started this survey and started this, because we did sort of a survey style first, asking who would want to participate, and when we started to do that, many people wanted to participate. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much, Reggie. Information share, that's an important one. And Laura, I see that you've got on the screen just kind of how to get started. And of course, that's my first question for the panelists. How does one really get started? There's so much information. So maybe you can share just a few of the ideas that are displayed there.
So start a dialogue with your students. Keep in mind that not all students come from the same cultural backgrounds. While in El Paso, Texas, we are a Southwestern culture, we have a lot of military that have moved here from many, many places around the world as well as around this country. And they have a different perspective. So one of the things we need to do is help all of the other students and all of the team members from our school remember that people are coming from diverse backgrounds, especially our military population, where they have seen things that maybe no one else has seen. Maybe they come from an area where they have always been put down or ridiculed. For example, one of the examples I used in Chicago was being a woman in business in the 1980s was very difficult because, number one, I had a college degree and I was in business, but number two, I had to go toe-to-toe with men. That too, at its time, was a challenge. And there are students who are going through challenges that we are not aware of. And by becoming a school that listens, becoming a school that is interested in our students and in our staff, we start to understand the differences that we have just make us unique. They don't make us something to be afraid of or someone to be afraid of. And we may learn something from some other culture that we've never even thought of because we didn't take the time before to just stop and listen to somebody's reason why they are who or what they are.
Excellent. I'll tell you. Oh, please, Eric. Oh,
one thing. Because you brought it up, and when you talked about the person who walked up, you said their spouse was the police, and I believe Laura's spouse is the police. We are not an organization, and we are not a panel that's proposing anything around defund the police. We know that there are good police officers in our society, and many are good police officers. So this is want to make sure that from a political spectrum, we are not a commission that's looking to defund police. I just wanted to add that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Eric, I thought I heard you begin to say something as well. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I thought I heard that.
Yeah, I think a good way to get started with DEI is to really go through that bullet point list on the PDF document and find those things that you do well, celebrate them, highlight them, and then go through and look at the things that maybe you've started at some point, or it might be in policy, but it's not really focused on much. Dust that off and improve it a little bit. And then find the pieces in there where you're like, I'm not sure what this is or how we go about this. And reach out to some of the commissioners on here or at other institutions where you have a connection and say, how is it that you do this? I know that I would be happy to share anything that our university does on this topic. And we openly have a website where we post all of our policies and interactions in DEI matters, both for students and staff.
Phenomenal. Really wonderful. Thank you. I will share that we are now doing a policy review. I saw that as a bullet on one of the slides. And we were really intentional about understanding the use of pronouns and providing an opportunity for associates and students to include that in their email signature boxes. So just another example, there are some policies that may have been drafted quite a while ago and maybe didn't take into account and student catalogs, the use of pronouns and how profound that is. And so we are too doing a policy scan and revision at this point. All right, I appreciate that. I'm going to move into the Q&A. Now, I know I've asked a few questions, but I'm going to ask each of you all to weigh in on the following question. Can you share maybe why it's important for institutions to acknowledge DEI matters? We spoke about your personal life. You got involved in this work. But from an institutional perspective, and you're a representative of the institution, what's the why for an institution? What's the advantage? What's the benefit? And are there any risks for an institution in getting involved in this work?
Okay, I'm not shy, so I'll go first. This is Reggie Moore. I think one of the important factors are many of our programs that we offer have externships. And externships, our people need to understand the importance of this because we're getting them ready to go out in the workforce. To me, that's the most important thing about what we do. We prepare people to go out to the workforce. It's important that they understand diversity, equity, and inclusion, because when they go out in the workforce, they need to be aware of that, because if they go out with the wrong mindset, or more importantly, if they go out with the right mindset as a result of what we're doing, these students can be productive members of society in the right way. And they don't, I have less risk in these students losing their jobs because they went out not knowing how to present themselves. When students go to work, it's not only important that they know the curriculum, it's important to know how to interact with the rest of the staff. So I think this is important from that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Reggie makes some really awesome points there, and I have only a few things to add on top of what he's stated. The risk piece, I think if your DEI initiatives are well done, it actually will produce both less risk for you as an institution in how you would potentially be exposed if you were doing something improper or even viewed incorrectly to the general public on a DEI matter. I think that causes much greater risk to an institution. But the whole broad purpose of having a college or university is to teach students. It's education. And I think learning is optimized when students are comfortable. And if DEI issues exist in your campuses or amongst your staff or within student groups or populations, you're potentially causing reduced comfort, which ultimately leads to reduced learning, which leads to greater risk.
Excellent. Excellent.
I think institutionally, we probably all hear from our professional advisors that the #1 challenge they have is our students need more soft skill training. But soft skills is not just knowing that you need to show up to work on time, or that you need to be dressed appropriately for the job that you're doing and to be polite to your boss. Soft skills is a whole lot more than that. So soft skills is learning how to live your life in a way that is appropriate 24/7. And I think with DEI, we expand the conversation about soft skills to a cultural shift for all of those who are taking part in all of the education that DEI will bring to the table. So for an institution, I think it checks one of those soft skill boxes that all of us, or some of us, I know us for sure, in our area, we struggle with our employers is, could you please do more to help the students with their soft skills so that when we bring them into the workforce, they are not only skilled, but they are valuable employees.
Well, absolutely. That answers the next question, which was how do DEI inform students benefit future employers, right? And that's exactly one way that happens, is having the soft skills, actually termed essential skills now, they're so important, right? And Eric, to your point of just making, we are providing an education. It's not always limited to the degree-seeking program that they've registered into, is it? I mean, oftentimes it's a life education, and part of that is exposure to people and how others live, believe, act. And so that's absolutely right. That, I think, is a responsibility of higher education as well, is to expose across an array of experiences. The last question that I'm going to ask this panel to really weigh on is this. So our sector has platforms on which to share our story and have a positive impact. We're leading those conversations right now. How do we affect the narrative around the crucial role that our sector plays in changing lives as it relates to DEI matters? What's our responsibility, panelists, in this effort? Why us? Why do we take the charge? Why do we take the lead? What role does higher education play in this dialogue?
I certainly can start here. Well, it's my personal belief, and I've worked for Rasmussen for the last almost 7 years, and previous to that, another college that very well focused on inner city students in Minneapolis for the most part, some suburban, but mostly our focus was inner city. And it's been my belief the entire time that our sector has always done this. And that this is a way that we can demonstrate it to the non-believers, whether that's politicians in Washington or schools outside of our sector. In addition, there's room for improvement, and being leaders on the topic positions our sector and students better long-term.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, again, Eric's comments were perfect, spot on. I'd like to add that, we have a responsibility to shape the future. We have students. These students are going out in our communities, and we need to provide those students some hope. Oftentimes during this crisis, many people, it didn't matter whether they came from Park Avenue or Park Bench, were worried and didn't have hope. And we have a responsibility to provide hope to our students, and therefore providing hope to the world, because our students are 18 to 36. They're shaping the future, and our responsibility is to help them shape the future with hope. Those are my comments.
Excellent. Thank you. Lauren, would you like to add anything?
There's not much to add to those two gentlemen, but I would say from From the perspective of the financial responsibilities and regulations that our sector is placed upon, it weighs upon us every day, and we think about all of those different regulations every day. But I can't think of a better way for us to fight back than rather statistics and numbers and ratios and everything else that we are required to answer for. Why can't we push back with something like this and ask the rest of the education world, what are you doing about this? Can you too make a difference? Can we join on a crusade of sorts to start making all of our students more valuable because of what it is they have learned? And we as the team members for all of those schools. So I think with as much challenge, as many challenges as we have, being from this particular sector, which, by the way, I believe is the one that is going to take the lead in preparing our country for the next phase of technical training and skill sets. But if we could be the lighthouse, the beacon, or the standard bearer for this particular topic, there's not much they can throw at us for this particular topic, and we can then stand up toe to toe and have a constructive conversation about the education of our students and not all the statistics.
Beautifully said, all three of you. Thank you for that. You know, and I would just share that as I have just really immersed my interests and understandings in these topics, I've seen other areas in higher ed do the same. I've seen it in community colleges and public and private sectors and for-profit and not-for-profit. It's a common denominator. It's something that most of us can get on board with and understand and say, yeah, you know what, we may not agree on everything, but on this thing, yeah, we agree. And that's really important for our sector to present as united on something as big and as important as this. And to your point, everyone who's made it, panelists, you know, we are preparing students. We're preparing them in ways that will change our world, right? And if this isn't one issue that won't change the world for the better, then I just don't know what it is. So with that, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to each of the panelists for weighing in and sharing your perspectives and your expertise and your time. I want to say thank you to our attendees for listening. I know you're listen mode only. We appreciate your listening. We are going to ask you to please reach out to us, especially if you'd like more information about the certification and the Certification Plus process. If you're looking for resources, if you just want to talk, please reach out to us. You can certainly reach out to us and Jerry will facilitate that. And again, thank you for your time. Be kind to yourself and be kind to one another. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. And Marlo, thank you for leading us. And Jerry, thank you for putting on this panel.
Absolutely.